Yeah, I have a comment on Ocasio-Cortez. There's a reason why almost everyone who supports Ocasio-Cortez believes in white supremacy. It's because her policies flow naturally from an ideology which says that the people who are rich are the people who extract the wealth. And so, if the people today in 2018 are people who fundamentally have an extractive relationship with their population, it becomes very difficult to see why it's not reasonable to think that white people, who were the richest people in the world for a very long time, did not have an extractive relationship with the world, right? Like, I personally do not believe that, on the whole, on an economic basis, not a cultural basis, but on an economic basis, uh, the current elite are extractive. They overall pull the country forward. They're the most intelligent, the most competent, the most productive people in the country. And that's why, by and large, they have the money that they have. If it's not the case, if that's not the case, then you're in a new world of socialism. And that new world of socialism has premises which inexorably lead you to give credence to white supremacy if you think them through fully. That's why the vast majority of people who support people like Ocasio-Cortez believe in white supremacy wholeheartedly.
I don't see this connection at all. And by the way, companies like Google and Microsoft collect tolls, and there are many other such companies. They collect tolls. They are extractive.
No, they're not extractive. They are the most competent, the most intelligent, the most productive people in our society.
Sure.
And they're producing innovations. They're actually pulling society forward in a way that the vast majority of people couldn't really imagine. These firms are innovating, and they're bringing new products into the market. And this is the process that capitalism runs on. The idea that because you extract rents to a certain degree, you are a parasite is a nonsensical idea. And it leads you inexorably towards socialism if you accept it. But the reality is that every attempt to get rid of rent seekers in this way, or to get rid of quote unquote rent seekers, tends to plunge a country into chaos. It's not a good idea to believe that the people who have been selected by a competitive process to become the most powerful, the most have the most control over the economy are overall these worthless parasites. Because you can look at the statistics; they have the highest IQs, they have the most knowledge in their fields, and overall, they're extremely knowledgeable people. These elites are genuinely elite. Like,
no, they're not. No, they're
yes,
not.
They are. Factually, they are. Factually, they are. That's socialist nonsense that you're saying. Factually, the elites are elite.
Kyle, I think
this Cato Institute stuff helps no one.
Kyle, you need to be careful, because you could be committing a debate fallacy where you're invoking arguments that are begging the question. So there's multiple narratives out there, and basically what you're saying is you're completely denying the role of nepotism in accomplishment. And I think that's a bit naive and overly idealistic. I mean, I think people should give him a break. He's a young boy. He's obviously very idealistic, but should listen to what Kevin has to say, because he's been around for a while, and he's seen a lot of different things.
Let's look at Facebook. Facebook turns people into products. It strips their lives and sells it to God knows who. Just explain briefly how Facebook is in any way an advance.
Facebook is one of the great innovators in machine learning. I mean, how exactly does...
But that's a tautology.
Yeah, no, it isn't. Actually, it isn't. These people are funding some of the great scientific advances of our time, and that's more than most people can say about their own accomplishments in their lives. But moreover, I want to say that obviously nepotism has a role in everything, but the question is whether net it's overall nepotism that brings you up, or it's competence that brings you up. And the statistics are undeniable. In Western societies, it's mostly competence that brings you to the top, not mostly nepotism. Most billionaires are self-made. In other societies, like in Saudi Arabia, it's not true that the elites are necessarily the most competent people. But in the Western society, the elites are the most competent, the most knowledgeable, the most intelligent people, and that's just a fact.
This is a classic tautology. How do you know that they're the most competent? That they're the smartest? Because they're the billionaires.
You can know these things. There are statistics. You can test their IQs. You can test their knowledge.
Why don't you look at how much of Facebook was funded by the government? How much has Facebook received in government subsidies? Because the degree
that gets government subsidies, like, it's not trivial. SpaceX didn't get government subsidies like as a free handout. And you can see that from the fact that like firms that win the competitive bids are often very, very competent. Like if you look at the process that replaced the dam that blew in California, like the lowest bidder was one of these extremely efficient firms that got the job done on time and on budget, and that is significant. Ultimately, people who get a lot of money are going through a competitive process because a lot of people want that money. So if you say it's like, oh, it's just the position that got them there, you're just wrong. That's not how it works in Western societies, and that's why we have an economy that is booming the way that it is.
Booming?
But you have to suckle at the government.
It's booming?
The economy is rising up, and we are at full employment, and it's churning along relatively well.
Do you have a little shrine to the GDP where you live?
GDP
it's not
is
a question.
important.
The GDP is a useless indicator.
No, GDP is not
Useless.
useless.
Yes,
The notion that GDP is useless is purely something for economic illiterates. Obviously, it's not everything. And I am able to talk about all the ways in which culturally we're going down the drain. And that relates to the elites, and that relates to the dysfunction of the elites. But
Have you read the Unabomber Manifesto? Have you read it?
The notion that you'd bring the Unabomber Manifesto into this in an economic discussion, a discussion of economic fundamentals, is just ridiculous, in my opinion. I don't think the Unabomber
you talk about society while you advocate everything that destroys society, and that's exactly what the Unabomber identified.
Capitalism is what created our civilization and what brought us forward. Well, not just capitalism, but meritocracy.
Created our civilization.
Meritocracy. There are meritocratic systems that are not capitalist. Like, for example, the Soviet rocket program was meritocratic, extremely hierarchical, and not capitalist, and that was an example of a success. But you cannot have success without without somehow granting a huge amount of authority to people who are competent in the way that our elites are currently competent. That is to say, much higher IQ and much more knowledgeable in their field.
Yes, and their ability to shovel money and power and influence to themselves, claiming it's for the greater good.
Kyle,
it is for the greater good overall. We do much better than societies that attempt to stop that process.
Kyle, I think you should be careful. You're invoking a lot of sacred cows. And while I have no problem with invoking sacred cows as a debate strategy, I implore you to study the sacred cows of other people, because you're sounding a little bit like a fundamentalist. Maybe the way we perceive communists as being absolute and dogmatic in their views and unable to see things outside of their worldviews. It sounds like you're very pro maybe capitalism, maybe even anarcho-capitalism, if I'm reading that right. That's only one worldview. There are other worldviews that are equally substantiated that I would invite you to look into before digging your heels in too deep, and just try to hear people out for where they're coming from.
Well, you heard me praise the Soviet rocket program, did you not? I believe in the power of when the pedal is put to the metal, when we decide that we need to put people who are knowledgeable in charge, we can do that in ways other than through the capitalist competitive process. But it needs to be a competitive process, and it needs to put a huge amount of authority into people who look very, very like the people who are currently in charge. And it's not just a question of like, if you look at the scientists who brought the U.S. rocket program forward, they looked a lot like the Soviet scientists who brought their rocket program forward. And the fact is that a process that brings people like that to the fore is the process that we need. And that's the process that brings people like Elon Musk.
This was a government command economy. Screw your head on.
Yeah. Do you understand that I'm acknowledging here the power of other systems to become meritocratic in the way that capitalism is meritocratic? But I'm pointing out that you can see the statistical links between the people who succeed in capitalism and the people who succeed in these government programs.
But what you're saying, what you're doing is what people do when they say that China is a successful example of communism. You point to something in which you need meritocracy, you need capitalism to make it work, and they say, oh, okay, well, look at the Soviet rocket program. If they didn't use a meritocratic capitalist system, it wouldn't have worked. They would have just gotten lazy sloth bureaucrats to do it. Wait a minute. And that's what China does as well. They enforce an autocratic communist system on everything else, but when they need money, they enforce a capitalist somewhat system. And you can go, oh, look, it works because they're using meritocratic systems, but they're not. They're just using it where they're necessary to use it, and they're not acknowledging that it's capitalist or meritocratic.
Well, you're sort of making my point is that you need meritocracy, and the capitalism works because it's meritocratic, and it's not the only meritocratic system, though it is at the moment the primary meritocratic system.
You don't seem to understand anything about economies of scale.
Yep.
For instance, how large companies whine about regulatory burdens, but use those regulatory burdens to crush competition. That's just one example.
Large firms are drivers of innovation.
Oh, stop.
Yes, they are.
Stop.
What did you just say? I missed that. What did you say?
Large firms are drivers of innovation.
What?
Bell Labs drove a huge amount of innovation.
Yeah, by buying up small inventors' patents and then developing them.
They funded a lot of innovation, not just buying up innovation that was created before. They funded a lot of innovation.
Bill Gates paid $6,000 for DOS without letting the Seattle company that he bought it from know that this was going to be used as an operating system by IBM. Bill Gates personally and Microsoft made billions of dollars out of this. Is this an example of the innovation you're talking about?
If you could do a better job of creating an operating system, you can do it. It's a free market. Microsoft created a compelling product, and that's why they're being used today. And obviously, there is some skullduggery in Microsoft history, and I'm not denying that. But overall, they are where they are because they create a product that people want to buy. And
but tell that to anybody creating new social networks who can't get on the App Store, who can't get on Google Play, and those things are being given to them by the government.
The overall system is not about nepotism, but about your merits. The fact is that most of the people who are poor are not poor because of their lack of connections, but because of their lack of merit.
Merit? How do you not merit being let on a store that everyone else is because of your political views?
I mean, that's part of being socially competent, but also that's not what happens to most people. Yeah, that's part of being socially competent.
The circle gets tighter and tighter and tighter.
Not really. It's not hard to get on the App Store.
You're saying
the vast majority of people have no problem getting on the App Store. The vast majority of people even would talk about political things that are very, very edgy, would not have a problem getting on the App Store if they were competent in separating identities and doing what they had to do. It's not really that difficult. It's not true that like conservatives overall can't succeed because of this gulag of a system. Overall, the richer people are more Republican.
You're not a conservative. What would you know about it?
Overall, Republican people are richer.
Kyle, how many of these companies have received government bailouts, which are by definition socialist?
Receiving government bailouts is not a trivial thing to do. It involves competence. It's not just
if you fail as hard as GM does, then you get more money.
GM made itself crucial to
capitalism.
GM made itself crucial to the economy. That was an achievement by GM. GM had the ability to maneuver itself to survive. That is an achievement by GM. It's not a trivial thing. And the fact is that the notion that this is purely about nepotism, purely about some sort of handout, is nonsense. When you look at the fact that if that were true, then you wouldn't see this correlation of wealth with IQ. You wouldn't see this correlation of wealth with knowledge, and you wouldn't see the fact that overall, people who have no mental illness and who have no social problems and who are really intelligent would not be rich if it was all about nepotism.
We're not arguing
that it was all about nepotism.
It's mostly not about nepotism.
Everything that you're saying can be boiled down to what Scott Greer said: behead those who insult the free market. You have turned this tautology into a religion.
The free market is pretty valuable, actually. Yeah.
What free market are we talking about here? What free market?
We have a relatively free market where
with a crooked casino.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The issue is that your arguments imply that it's mostly about crookedness, where I say it's mostly about competence. Mostly, what people rise to the top because of is because of well, one is luck, but two is their own merits, and a distant third would be nepotistic connections.
Who went to jail after 2008? Who went to jail?
The notion that these people need to go to jail is basically socialist bullshit. Like, it's just socialist bullshit.
You see, the people who are best at stealing are the people who have demonstrated their competency in high IQ. And I will agree that high IQ gives people the ability to pull fast ones on people. So yeah, the IIQ argument is partly valid.
Not to mention, there's a reason why there's antitrust laws. There's a reason why regulations have to be put on people rising to the top and then using their monopoly power to crush everyone beneath them. It's because it stifles innovation, not because it promotes it. And when you have, as of right now, the big tech companies stifle innovation because they own all of the patents and they crush anybody who tries to come up against them with any type of differing idea or principle, and they're using public resources to do so.
What big companies do is drive up prices with their market power, so they can extract more than the natural rate. Like in a perfectly competitive market, profit trends towards zero, and the ability to actually invest in R&D trends towards zero. So this process whereby firms become larger and gain market power is the process by which it is possible for a capitalist system to innovate. If you have only perfect competition, then there are only the minimum profits, and then there's very little to actually put into R&D.
Okay, Kevin, you get final words on this topic before we move on. Kevin.
There's really no arguing with true belief such as this, because it's immune to rationality.
Mm-hmm.